My name is Scarlett. I'm 25, and if there's one thing I've always known for sure, it's this. No one in my family ever thought I was meant for anything big. My grandfather, Gerald Whitaker, passed away a week ago from a sudden stroke. He was the founder of Whitaker & Co., a private investment firm worth hundreds of millions, and once nicknamed the Old Fox of Wall Street. But to me, he was simply the only man who ever held my hand without trying to control me. He believed in me. When I was a child, he told me, Scarlett, if someone says you're not good enough, let them sit in the audience and watch you do what they never dared. Today was the will reading. The meeting room was set up in the Long Island estate. Polished walnut wood, crystal glasses filled with imported water, ceiling lights reflecting off the tailored suits of people I used to call family. My mother, Evelyn, wore a cinched black dress, not a single tear in sight. Beside her sat her husband, Paul, the man she married less than a year after my grandfather was hospitalized. He's the type who smiles without his eyes and talks to women like they're in elementary school. I stayed silent, not out of fear, but because I'd learned to be still when those who think they hold power start revealing who they truly are. My grandfather's personal attorney, Mr. Harris, stood, placing his leather case on the table. Thank you all for coming, he began. I will now read the final testament of Mr. Gerald Whitaker, signed and notarized 3 months prior to his passing. Before he could even open the folder, my mother stood, placing her hand on Paul's arm like she was crowning him. I'd like to say a few words, she began, calm and poised, like it had been rehearsed 100 times. According to my father's wishes, which he shared with me many times before he passed, as of today, Paul, my husband, will take over operations at Whitaker & Co. The room froze. I turned to look at her. Paul adjusted his collar and smirked. Excuse me, Mr. Harris interjected, but according to the legal will, all shares of Whitaker & Co., all financial assets, and the estate have been left to Scarlett Whitaker. I'd clearly heard the crystal glasses clink as someone jolted. Every pair of eyes snapped toward me like they'd just discovered a traitor at a funeral. My mother clutched her purse. That's impossible, she hissed through her teeth. My father would never do that. There must be a mistake. Mr. Harris remained composed. There is no mistake. Gerald confirmed everything in full mental capacity with legal counsel. Scarlett is the sole heir, effective immediately. Paul let out a laugh. Sweetheart, looks like the old man left us $100 million joke. He turned to me with feigned sympathy. Scarlett, you're not serious, are you? Running a firm with over 300 employees and 40 active projects isn't some summer internship. I stayed still. I didn't need to yell to be heard. People who are used to giving orders can't handle confident silence. My mother shook her head. If that's true, she said coldly, then you have no reason to stay in this house. Pack your things. I turned to her, smiled, and placed 2 fingers on the wooden table. You mean the house that now has my name on the deed? A beat of stunned silence. I heard a stifled chuckle from a distant cousin across the table. My mother turned pale. She glanced at Mr. Harris, then back at me, as if hoping someone would yell, just kidding, but no one did. I tightened my grip on my purse strap. The battle had begun, and I was ready. Paul was the first to lose control. He slammed his hand on the wooden table, causing a few water glasses to tremble. What kind of circus is this? He growled, his voice low and tense with anger. A 25-year-old kid managing an investment firm? Gerald clearly wasn't thinking straight when he signed that will. I stayed seated, hands folded calmly in my lap. My heart was pounding, but my face gave away nothing. In my head, I heard my grandfather's voice again, whispering, composure is how you own the stage when they're waiting for you to fall. My mother turned to Mr. Harris, who remained unfazed, as if he had anticipated every second of this scene. I want to see the original, she said. I don't believe my father would leave everything to a child and abandon his only daughter. Mrs. Evelyn, Mr. Harris replied, enunciating each word deliberately. I'm sorry, but the will was verified at the offices of Michael and Lyons 3 months ago, witnessed by two independent legal officials. This is the final, legally binding version. No other will is recognized under the law. I stood up. Mom, I said, not loud but clear. This isn't a game, and it's not a mistake. Grandpa planned every word of this with intention. She clenched her jaw. The fury in her eyes began to shift into something colder, something far more dangerous. You think a couple of signatures put you on my level? She said, slowly walking toward me. I've lived in this estate my entire life. You? You just came crawling back less than a year ago. You really think you deserve this? It's not about what I think, I answered. It's about what Grandpa decided, and the law agrees with him. Paul stepped in then, switching to a voice as syrupy and fake as ever. Scarlett, do you even realize what you're carrying? This estate, the company, this isn't light work. You'll get eaten alive by investors, sharks, and shareholders with more experience than you can imagine. I don't need your survival lessons, thanks, I smiled faintly. And if you thought I'd be scared off by words, that's unfortunate. Right then, the sound of my mother's heels echoed down the hallway as she stormed off, only to return seconds later, holding her phone. She tossed it at my feet. Then pack your things. This house no longer welcomes backstabbers like you. The phone hit the floor near me. On the screen, the security app displayed one message: homeowner code changed. I picked it up, raising an eyebrow. You changed the front gate code? I asked. That's right. You're no longer part of this house. Mistake. I pulled out a notarized copy of the property deed and laid it on the table. This estate, I said, has been in my name since 10 a.m. yesterday, and if you'd like to continue living here, I can draw up a lease agreement. Her face went white. Paul took a step back. Mr. Harris shrugged slightly, as if confirming everything I said. The air in the room grew heavier, like someone was about to collapse. You'll regret this, my mother rasped. I lost everything because of a stupid, ungrateful daughter. No, I replied, eyes locked on hers. You lost everything because you never once thought about sharing anything. Then I turned to Mr. Harris. I want to start the transition process tomorrow. Please send me the personnel and financial files today, and the new security system needs to be reprogrammed. He nodded. I'll handle it within the hour. Paul sighed, finally realizing there was nothing left to grab onto. Scarlett, you have no idea what you've just done. I nodded slowly. Oh, I know exactly what I've done. I officially moved into the estate the next morning. The new security team had already replaced every lock, reset the entire security system, and installed additional surveillance cameras. Beside me stood Mr. Harris and a man named Dean Becker, the legal director who had served my grandfather for over 20 years, and now acted as my personal advisor. Less than 48 hours after the will was read, my mother and Paul returned, not to apologize, not to say goodbye. They arrived in tailored suits, calmly seated in my grandfather's office as if nothing had ever changed. I walked in. My mother sat cross-legged, holding an espresso, her gaze cold as stone. Paul wore a smile, the kind polished at second-rate political boot camps. We need to talk, privately, she said flatly. Dean looked at me. I nodded. Once it was just the three of us, Paul spoke first. Scarlett, we all know you're not easily swayed, but you shouldn't act alone either. You hold the shares, no one disputes that. But a firm like Whitaker & Co. can't run on paper titles alone. It needs experience. I said nothing. My mother picked up. We can work together. You'll be the public figure, the CEO in name. You'll remain the face of the company in campaigns, the one people see. Paul will handle internal operations. You won't have to worry about long meetings or boardroom pressure. You'll still receive an executive salary, financial support, total freedom, no obligation. Paul shrugged, as if this offer were a favor I should be grateful for. You just get to live comfortably, travel, do philanthropy. Let me take care of risky investments, portfolio shifts, crisis control. I looked straight into his eyes. You're saying I'd be your puppet? Not exactly, my mother replied softly, like she was trying to lull me to sleep. You'd still hold power. On paper, I laughed. Not the kind that brings relief, the kind you give when someone thinks they're playing chess, but they're holding dominoes. You two really think I'm still the girl who wore college sweatshirts and asked for rent money? I stood up, my voice steady but laced with contempt. Mom, you never asked what I wanted. Paul always treated me like a threat to eliminate, and now that your plans collapsed, you come in offering me a puppet throne? My mother's grip on her espresso cup tightened. Scarlett, if you keep resisting, you'll walk yourself straight into a trap. The board won't have patience for naivete. Do you think they'll keep supporting you forever? When their confidence slips, they'll turn to someone who can actually lead. Paul has experience, he has connections. What do you have? My grandfather's trust, I said without hesitation, and proof that I'm not being manipulated. Paul tilted his head, his expression darkening. You should really think this through. Turning us down means going to war, and you don't have many allies in the investment world, Scarlett. I stepped up to the table, planting both hands on its cold, polished surface. I'd rather the market abandon me than hand over my grandfather's life's work to a man who married my mother just to climb the power ladder. My mother shot up. You don't understand what you're saying. Don't test me. I built everything I have with my mind, not with emotions like you. Emotions are the only thing you've never understood, I said, turning toward the door. This meeting's over, and if you and Paul wish to stay here through the weekend, I can send over a short-term lease. But starting Monday, the security system won't recognize either of you. I walked to the doorway. Just before I closed it behind me, I said one last thing without looking back. Grandpa handed me an empire because he knew I didn't need anyone to tie my shoes. Less than a week after I officially became CEO of Whitaker & Co., the dream unraveled into a nightmare, one meticulously staged. On Monday morning, I was reviewing the financial outlook in my new office, the one that used to belong to my grandfather, when Laura, our head of PR, burst in, pale as if she just walked away from a car crash. Scarlett, she said quickly, you need to see the news. I opened my laptop. A headline from one of the most respected business publications hit like a blade. Whitaker Corp falls into hands of inexperienced 25-year-old CEO, market skeptical. Stock drops 4.2%. I clicked on the article. It didn't just mock my competence. It painted the sudden leadership shift as a red flag. There was even a quote from an inside source claiming I had ignored advice from senior advisors, causing division in the executive team. That never happened. I knew it. My grip tightened on the mouse. How long after they got internal info was this published? I asked Laura. Less than 18 hours, she replied, and rumors are already spreading on investor forums that the board is discussing a leadership transition. I stared at her. Who said that? No confirmed source, but it doesn't sound completely baseless. I walked over to the massive glass windows. Below me was the full stretch of New York, but all I could see were the gray pieces shifting inside my head. My mother. Paul. They'd made their move. That night, I called an emergency meeting with Dean Becker and Martine Cheng, our head of cybersecurity. I want a full trace of all internal emails from the past 2 weeks, I said, cutting straight to the point, especially those containing the words CEO, Scarlett, stock, leadership change, vote. Martin hesitated slightly. That could be seen as an invasion of privacy. I'm the CEO, I cut in, and Whitaker & Co. lost over $50 million, 0 cents in market value in a single day. I'm not asking. I'm giving an order. Dean nodded. Do it, Martin. 3 hours later, I had the results. An alternate email account had been created 2 weeks ago using an unregistered device. It had leaked internal documents, including leadership meeting notes and strategy reviews, to 3 major financial journalists. The IP trace led to a location in the Hamptons. I leaned back in my chair. Paul and my mother were currently living in the Hamptons, exactly as I suspected. But that wasn't the final blow. The next morning, I received a letter from the executive committee. The board formally requests an emergency vote to reassess the CEO position. My assistant, Karen, a woman in her late 50s who had served my grandfather for over 15 years, placed the letter on my desk with a look of quiet regret. "Sweetheart, they're pushing you out." I nodded, not quietly. I called Dean. "Set up a meeting with our largest shareholders within 48 hours and contact Lucas Morgan, my grandfather's old partner in Chicago. Tell him I need a name to appear at the right time." Lucas Morgan was the only one of my grandfather's former partners my mother couldn't buy off. He had once run a $6 billion zero-cents fund, but stepped away after discovering Paul leaked market-sensitive data 5 years ago, a small scandal buried with enough money. I knew they wouldn't sit still once they found out I brought Lucas in. But I wasn't playing chess one move at a time anymore. I was under attack, and this time I'd answer with the entire system. I met Lucas Morgan at 10 p.m. that night in his glass-walled office on the 41st floor of the Morgan Capitol building, just off Hudson Yards. The city below was still glowing, a map of power games that never sleep. Lucas didn't shake my hand right away. He looked at me for a few seconds, as if gauging whether I had survived the storm. "Scarlett Whitaker," he said slowly. "You're later than I expected, but maybe still right on time." "It's worse than I thought," I replied. "I need help." He sat down, unbuttoning his blazer. "And I need a bit of entertainment before I really retire." We mapped out a counterattack in under 2 hours. 3 steps, each one designed to strike directly at the heart of my mother and Paul's scheme. Step 1. Rebuild confidence among major investors. Lucas still had strong ties with 3 investment firms that once served as core backers of Whitaker & Co. He arranged a private meeting the next morning at the Landmark Club in Manhattan. I walked into the boardroom with my head held high, even though my mind was spinning with dozens of worst-case scenarios. "You all know I was the one Gerald entrusted with this company," I began. "But I'm not here today to claim a title. I'm here for your backing." A bald, dark-skinned man named Clifford, representing Telestra Capital, asked bluntly, "Why should we trust you over Paul? He's got over 25 years of experience." I handed them the confidential financial report Dean had prepared, specifically highlighting a $38 million zero-cents failed investment Paul had personally signed off on 3 years ago, while acting as interim CEO of a satellite fund. "And interestingly," I added, "my mother, Evelyn Whitaker, personally guaranteed that deal with her own assets. I have the paperwork here." Clifford went quiet. The other 2 exchanged looks. Lucas gently pushed his coffee cup aside, like a silent cue that the board was tipping. The result? All 3 signed a formal letter publicly supporting Scarlett Whitaker to continue as CEO. Step 2, hit the media back with the truth. That same evening, I sat under the lights of Market Mirror Live, one of the most watched financial talk shows on the East Coast. The host had interviewed my grandfather 3 times before. "Why does a 25-year-old woman think she's ready to run an investment empire?" she asked. I didn't dodge it. "I didn't think I was ready," I said, until I had no choice but to step up, and it turns out I'd been preparing my whole life without realizing it. I told them about unpaid internships during the summer at my grandfather's office, about late nights studying financial reports just to understand a balance sheet, about board meetings where I was ignored, told to just take notes, yet quietly learned to read the silence between numbers. My grandfather didn't leave me money. He left me a test. And today, I choose to take it, in front of everyone. The interview was shared over 2 million times in 24 hours. Whitaker & Co. stock rebounded by 2.7%. Step 3. Expose the sabotage from within. Barton Cheng, head of cybersecurity, completed the trace within 48 hours. What we found was undeniable. An email sent from an anonymous address using a VPN, but carelessly accessed once via a home Wi-Fi network in the Hamptons. Attached was a recorded phone call, Paul feeding a financial journalist a false quote, claiming Scarlett refused to support the firm's fall strategy. A leaked message from my mother explicitly stating if the media flips her, the board will take her out next. Lucas sat beside me as I held the file, his eyes sharp like a freshly honed blade. Good, he said. Now let's see how they react when you start rewriting the rules. That morning, I wore a deep navy suit, hair pulled into a sleek bun, and stepped into the boardroom on the 42nd floor like I was born to sit at the center of that 8-meter mahogany table. 12 board members were already present, their silence broken only by the faint sound of pages turning and pens tapping against the polished wood. They were all people my grandfather had once trusted, but that trust no longer extended to me. At least, not yet. Just as I took my seat, the door at the far end opened. Paul entered, clutching a thick folder. My mother followed closely behind, her stride proud and deliberate, as if this were a catwalk instead of a meeting that would decide the future of the company. No one looked surprised when Paul was the first to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice firm and rehearsed like he'd practiced it all week. We are facing a period of instability. The recent controversy has rattled investors, dropped our stock, and shaken confidence. He swept his gaze across the table. Scarlett is intelligent, no one denies that. But a company like Whitaker & Co. cannot run on intelligence alone. We, he gestured toward my mother, nodding as though they were a united front on a campaign stage, propose a more stable solution. Scarlett will serve as the symbolic figurehead of the company, while I oversee internal operations. A few heads nodded. One board member, Mr. Grant, even asked, So, a ceremonial CEO? No, Paul adjusted his glasses. I propose Scarlett hold the honorary title of executive chair. All strategic decisions would be handled by myself and the advisory board. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I turned to Lucas, seated calmly beside me, one hand resting on a sealed, cream-colored envelope. I nodded. Lucas stood. No introduction was needed. Before the board proceeds with any vote, he said, we request to submit some internal documents that may impact today's decision. Each member received a copy. The room fell into dead silence for nearly a full minute, broken only by the sound of flipping pages and sharp, uneasy breaths. Inside those folders were an audio recording of Paul feeding false internal claims to a financial reporter, intended to destabilize market confidence. A thread of messages between my mother and Paul, discussing how to sway the board vote by promising long-term financial incentives to certain members. Trace logs showing leaked emails were sent from my mother's private home in the Hamptons, alongside footage from internal security showing her using a restricted login after the will had been finalized. Mr. Grant looked up, disappointment clear in his eyes. This is all verified? I'm afraid so, Lucas replied calmly. Paul shot to his feet. This is fabricated. None of this proves I sabotaged the company. I smirked. You didn't need to sabotage anything, Paul. You just had to make them doubt me, and that was enough to push me out. Unfortunately for you, this time I came prepared. My mother finally spoke. Scarlett, you have no idea what you're doing. If you keep pushing against us, no one's going to protect you from the wolves in finance. I turned my chair and faced her directly. I was raised among wolves in silk dresses, Mom. I learned from the best. Grandpa. And you? You only learned how to take. Mr. Holloway, the board chair, struck his gavel. We'll proceed to vote. One by one, hands went up, slowly but steadily. 1, 2, 3, and finally, all 12. I was officially retained as CEO with full executive authority. Paul's face flushed red, trembling with rage. He stood, slammed his hand on the table. You'll regret this. No, I replied. I only regret ever thinking you had a conscience. Security entered at Mr. Holloway's signal. Paul was escorted out of the room. My mother didn't resist. She turned to look at me, eyes bitter. You really are your parents' child, but only half. I know, I said firmly, and I chose the right half to keep. 1 year later, I stood on stage at the National Investment Conference in Dallas, facing over 3,000 investors, analysts, and top corporate leaders from across the country. Behind me, a massive LED screen displayed the headline, Scarlett Whitaker, Most Influential Under 30 CEO of the Year. I wore a high-collared black dress, simple but commanding. Among countless faces that once doubted me, I now saw respect, and in some cases, caution. I stepped up to the podium without a tremble in my hand or a crack in my voice. Exactly 365 days ago, I began everything I knew. My career, my family legacy, my name was at risk of being stolen for one reason. I was too young to be believed. The murmurs in the hall fell silent. No one asked what I'd studied, what I'd done, or how many years I'd prepared. They saw my age, my gender, and a headline online. So I don't blame them, I thank them, because their doubt forced me to prove myself, not with words, but with results. The screen behind me lit up with the data. Whitaker & Co.'s net profit rose 18.2% compared to the previous fiscal year. Our restructured investment strategy expanded operations into 3 international markets. The Gerald Legacy Fund, our financial education program for high school girls, awarded 124 full scholarships in its first year. I paused for a few seconds, then continued more slowly. Success isn't about age. It's about standing against the voices trying to pull you down, even when they come from your own family. It's knowing when to be silent and when to rise, even if no one stands behind you. I glanced at the front row, where Lucas Morgan sat with arms folded, smiling proudly. Beside him were Dean Becker and Laura, the two who never left my side, even when I only had a single vote left on the board. Legacy isn't something you inherit, I concluded. It's something you build from what others tried to destroy. The entire auditorium rose in applause. I didn't bow. I simply stood there, steady, just like Grandpa taught me. Real value doesn't need to be broadcast. It echoes on its own. As I stepped off stage, a female reporter rushed up and held out a mic. Scarlett, if Gerald were alive today, what do you think he'd say? I didn't even have to say, good. Now you can start doing something that truly matters. That evening, I returned to the Long Island estate. The house had a different energy now. No more thick scent of my mother's Chanel. No more clicking of Paul's leather shoes. Instead, soft jazz, warm lighting, and a new desk where I kept my grandfather's old notebook. On the first page, in his familiar handwriting, no one is born to lead. They lead because they refuse to back down. I sat down and added one line at the bottom. I didn't back down, and I never will. At 26, I was no longer Gerald Whitaker's granddaughter. Scarlett, the woman who reclaimed a legacy nearly stolen and turned it into something entirely her own. Scarlett's story is a powerful reminder that success isn't defined by age or status, but by resilience, preparation, and the courage to stand firm in the face of adversity. In real life, we may be doubted or betrayed, even by those closest to us, but what matters most is not letting them write our story for us. Be like Scarlett. Don't back down, don't compromise, and protect the worth you truly deserve, even if it means standing against the world. So what do you think about Scarlett's journey? Would you have done the same in her place? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring stories about family, choices, and resilience.